Imagine taking the ultimate text of ancient Chinese philosophy, right? A text that is just intensely focused on the passive flow of nature and organic laws, and laying it directly over the foundational text of Western monotheism.
Right, which on the surface, I mean, they should just repel each other like opposite ends of a magnet.
Exactly. I mean, they're separated by thousands of miles, thousands of years, and entirely different cultural paradigms. But our source material today makes a pretty massive claim. It argues that if you put these wildly different texts under a microscope, they actually share the exact same spiritual DNA.
Yeah, and it is honestly one of the most compelling puzzles in human history. We've got a fascinating stack of sources to sift through today, comprehensive analyses that place some of the most influential texts ever written right side by side. Primarily, we are diving into the Tao Te Ching, the Diamond Sutra, and, the biblical text.
And just to be clear up front, the mission for this deep dive is not to debate theology. We aren't here to argue about who is right or who is wrong or whose historical context is superior.
No, not at all.
The goal today is to uncover that hidden shared DNA. We want to explore how, despite all their surface-level contradictions, these texts might actually be teaching the exact same curriculum. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to compare these ancient texts, we have to establish the fundamental baseline concept that they are all, well, desperately trying to describe.
Right, and to do that, we need to introduce the concept of the heavenly Tao. The sources we're looking at argue that understanding this Tao is quite literally the door to all mysteries.
The door to all mysteries.
It is the foundational operating system of reality. And the argument here is that once you grasp this central concept, a whole library of supposedly contradictory ancient texts, whether it's the Zhuangzi, the Quran, the Yoga Sutras, the Bible, or the Diamond Sutra, they suddenly just snap into focus.
Like they stop looking like competing tribal histories.
Exactly. They start looking like different manuals describing the exact same physics of reality.
And the sources use an analogy for this that I think grounds the concept really nicely. Think about human beings across the globe. You have people with totally different physical characteristics, different languages, different cultures. On the outside, an observer from another planet might think we're a completely different species.
Right, but if you take a swab and look under a microscope.
You find the exact same human DNA.
Yeah.
The core argument here is that these different scriptures share the DNA of the Tao. But I actually need to challenge this premise right out of the gate.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because it is incredibly easy to sit in a modern secular context and just say, oh, all religions shared the same DNA. It's a very comforting, diplomatic thought. But what does that actually look like when you put the texts side by side?
Right.
For instance, the Christian concept of the word implies this, conscious creator actively speaking things into existence. But the Taoist concept of the Tao feels much more passive, like an organic law of physics. Are we just playing word games here by forcing them together?
Well, that is the exact friction we need to look at. Let's get into the mechanics of the texts themselves. In the Tao Te Ching, specifically in chapters 1 and 42, the text explicitly states that the Tao is the mother of all things.
The mother?
Yeah. The phrasing indicates that the Tao breeds or gives birth to the universe, everything. The earth itself, historical figures like Laozi or the Buddha, and the very texts they left behind, they were all born from this underlying passive organic principle.
So the Tao is this ultimate origin point, functioning almost like a cosmic womb.
No, cross-reference that with the Bible.
Yeah.
The Gospel of John chapter 1 opens with, in the beginning was the Word, and all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made.
The functional outcome is identical. I mean, all things were made through him maps perfectly onto the concept of being the mother of all things. But my pushback remains. One is an active creator and one is a passive force.
Well, what's fascinating here is the translation history of that specific verse. When the Bible was first being translated into Chinese, scholars really wrestled with how to translate the Greek concept of the logos, which we translate into English as the word.
Right.
Because the logos in ancient Greek philosophy wasn't just spoken vocabulary, it meant the fundamental ordering principle of the universe, the divine logic.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So they had to ask what Chinese concept perfectly encapsulated an invisible, fundamental ordering principle that gives rise to all reality. And they translated logos directly as Tao. The Chinese Bible literally reads, "In the beginning was the Tao."
Wow. That reframes the entire tension. So they are using entirely different grammatical structures, one active, one passive, to state the exact same universal truth.
Exactly.
One culture describes the ordering principle as an active voice speaking reality into existence. Another culture describes it as a passive mother giving birth to reality. But the underlying physics they are pointing at are identical.
They are. In fact, Chapter 16 of the Tao Te Ching goes as far as to explicitly state that heaven is Tao and Tao is God.
It totally bridges the gap between theology and natural law. But if these incredibly diverse texts are all pointing to the exact same invisible reality, the same Tao, then we kind of have to reconsider what we are actually looking at when we look at a religion.
Yeah, the sources suggest we have completely drifted away from the original utility of these texts, starting with how we even define the word itself.
Let's look at the etymology. The English word religion comes from the Latin root religa, re, meaning again, and ligare, meaning to bind or connect. Fundamentally, it just means to reconnect with that original divine source or ordering principle.
Right.
But the Chinese etymology for religion, zhangzhao, that just blows this wide open.
It really does. The term zhangzhao is made of two characters. Zhang means highest or supreme. You can think of it like the ultimate ancestor at the very top of a lineage.
Yeah.
And jiao means education. The ancient character for jiao visually depicts a father holding a stick, instructing his son. It is entirely about the transmission of knowledge.
So zhangzhao, the concept we just casually translate as religion, literally means the highest education.
Yeah, highest education.
That is a massive paradigm shift. It means religion, at its core, isn't about building sweeping cathedrals, burning a specific type of incense, or identifying with a specific cultural tribe.
No, those are purely human additions.
Right. The functional purpose of these systems is, quite literally, to enroll in the highest possible education available to a human mind.
It frames spiritual texts not as arbitrary rule books, but as an actual educational curriculum.
Which brings up a really cool analogy from the sources about return on investment. Think about how we view higher education today. People will take on massive debt, move across the country, study for thousands of hours just to get into a school like Harvard or MIT instead of a local college.
Sure, because of the brand.
Right, but also because they understand the ROI. Better resources, elite networks, and a higher caliber of instruction yield a much higher return in your career and your life. So the logical question is, if these texts represent the highest possible education, what is the ROI? What is the actual payout for enrolling in this curriculum?
Well, the sources outline the ultimate rewards as wealth, honor, and longevity. But we have to understand how these texts define those concepts, because it's not about material hoarding.
Right. It's not about buying a yacht.
Exactly. Look at Chapter 11 of the Diamond Sutra. The Buddha sets up a hypothetical scenario, asking if a person who gives away entire universes filled with physical treasure, gold, silver, jewels, acquires a lot of merit.
And the answer is obviously yes, an immense amount.
Yes. But then the text pivots. It claims that simply understanding, holding on to, and explaining just the four-line verse of the Diamond Sutra brings greater fortune and merit than all of that physical treasure combined.
Okay, on the surface, that sounds like typical spiritual hyperbole. 4 lines of text over a literal universe of gold. But if we look at the mechanics of why, it makes complete sense.
How so?
Well, a universe of physical treasure is finite. I mean, it can be squandered, it can be stolen, it degrades over time. But a 4-line mental framework that allows you to accurately decode reality, that scales infinitely. It changes every subsequent decision you make for the rest of your life. The understanding itself is the wealth because it compounds.
Precisely. The wisdom is the asset. And we see this mechanism mirrored perfectly in the Tao Te Ching. Chapter 70 states, "Those who know me are few, those who follow me are honored."
Wow.
Yeah, and Chapter 51 reinforces how the Tao is revered and its virtue is honored. True understanding of this education is statistically rare. And because it is rare, and because it provides such a profound advantage in navigating reality, it brings an untouchable honor.
And we find that exact same promised ROI in the biblical texts. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 4 outlines it plainly. It says, "The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life."
Riches, honor, and life.
Wealth, honor, and longevity. 3 completely different ancient traditions offering the exact same syllabus and the exact same diploma.
Right, but you can't just walk into the lecture hall and demand a seat. If the return on investment for this highest education is ultimate wealth and a compounding mental framework, there is a strict prerequisite for enrollment.
There's an admissions test.
Basically, Notice that the verse from Proverbs didn't just promise riches and honor. It said the reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor.
Humility is the barrier to entry. The sources use a martial arts analogy here, and I know the wise old master trope is a bit of a cliche, but it perfectly illustrates the cognitive bandwidth issue at play here.
Oh, definitely.
Imagine a martial arts grandmaster who holds the ultimate paradigm-shifting techniques of their discipline. They aren't hoarding those secrets out of spite. If a hotshot student walks into the dojo, arrogant, convinced their basic punches are already perfect, they literally lack the cognitive space to absorb new information.
You cannot pour water into a cup that is already full.
Exactly.
The arrogance creates a closed system. The master will just let the student keep practicing their basic, flawed techniques. To receive the highest knowledge, you have to initiate a complete unlearning process.
You must empty your cup.
Yes. Fearing God, in the context of Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, operates on this exact mechanic. It states that this profound reverence and humility is the very beginning of knowledge. It is step one.
Because only fools despise wisdom and instruction.
Right, because their cups are too full of their own ego to accept the data.
So let's say I've emptied my cup. I've met the prerequisite. I'm sitting in the lecture hall of the highest education. What is the actual curriculum? Because if it's just rote memorization or, blind faith, that doesn't seem to justify the massive ROI we talked about.
No, the curriculum is the acquisition of profound, actionable wisdom. The goal is not passive belief. It is ultimate cognitive clarity. Take the title Buddha, for example.
Okay.
It is not a given name. It is a descriptive title that translates to the awakened one. An awakened person is simply someone who has acquired supreme wisdom and woken up to the reality of the Tao, while the rest of humanity is essentially sleepwalking through their existence.
And Chapter 8 of the Diamond Sutra supports this, right? Claiming that all supreme wisdom originates from its teachings, and the Tao Te Ching points that wisdom inward. Chapter 33 reads, knowing others is intelligence, knowing oneself is true wisdom.
It demands an internal audit, and the biblical texts align with this focus on supreme knowledge as well. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 3 describes a God of immense ultimate knowledge.
It's all about knowing.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we stop seeing these texts as mystical poetry or tribal law. They function as highly engineered textbooks designed to bestow a divine operating system onto a mind that is humble enough to install it.
Let's bring this down from the clouds for a moment, though, because acquiring supreme wisdom and a divine operating system sounds fantastic in theory, but does it actually change how we operate on a Tuesday? Once you have this education, what are you supposed to do with it?
Well, the default human answer is usually, well, you use it to be a good person.
Which is a completely inadequate answer until we define what good actually means.
Exactly. The sources completely dismantle our standard, everyday definition of goodness. They pose a thought experiment that forces us to look at the actual physics of morality.
Yeah, and for you listening, I want you to really put yourself in this scenario. Imagine you are starving. You haven't eaten a single thing in 10 days. You are weak, you're desperate, and your survival instincts are just screaming.
The biological drive to take food would be overwhelming.
Right. You walk past a table, and sitting right there, completely unguarded, is a delicious, perfectly cooked chicken leg. You desperately want to steal it, but you don't.
You leave it there.
You leave it. And you don't take it for one of two reasons. Either you are so physically depleted from starvation that you literally lack the muscular strength to grab it and run, or you look up, see a security camera, and your fear of going to jail outweighs your hunger. Here's the critical question. Because you didn't steal the chicken leg, does that make you a good person?
Based on human standards, society would say yes, because no crime was committed. But the philosophical reality is entirely different.
The sources argue that you are absolutely not a good person in that scenario. Lacking the physical capacity to do harm or lacking the courage to overcome your fear of consequences does not equate to goodness, it just equates to impotence. So what does this all mean?
It exposes the flaw in our baseline human standard, which is usually just a passive, I don't actively harm people, therefore I am good. True goodness, according to this highest education, requires a specific mechanism.
And what's that?
You must have the full capacity and power to act. You must have zero fear of earthly consequences, and yet you actively choose to align your actions with divine laws instead of your own selfish desires.
Wow.
Yeah, you have to be fully capable of stealing a chicken leg, know you could get away with it, and still choose restraint because you operate on a higher standard.
You are calibrating your behavior to the heavenly Tao rather than the local penal code.
Exactly. Chapter 21 of the Tao Te Ching dictates that we must use the heavenly Tao as our ultimate standard, overriding our flawed human instincts. The biblical texts demand the exact same calibration.
Right, Isaiah chapter 8, verse 20.
Yes, it warns that we must look to God's instructions and laws as the definitive standard. If our actions are calibrated to anything else, there is no light in them.
It totally transforms goodness from a passive state of doing no harm into an active, deliberate alignment. It demands action in the real world. We see this in the book of James, chapter 2, verse 8, which commands us to actively love our neighbor, and 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 15, which commands the active doing of good deeds.
It's kinetic.
Yeah, and Taoism echoes this by teaching that the highest good is like water. It actively nourishes all things without competing. It's not just sitting on a mountain feeling enlightened. It is taking this divine wisdom and applying it as a utility in the world.
This brings us to the ultimate friction point. If all of these texts, separated by millennia, written in different languages, born from entirely different cultures, are pointing to the exact same divine standard of actionable goodness, the exact same pursuit of compounding wisdom, and the exact same underlying heavenly Tao.
Why do they look so wildly different on the surface? Why has humanity spent thousands of years fracturing into different religions if the curriculum is identical?
That is the essential question.
If the DNA is the same, why is the packaging so unrecognizable?
The key might be found in a brilliant piece of context surrounding chapter 23 of the Diamond Sutra. The text states, all dharmas are equal, no high or low. Dharma, in this context, meaning all universal laws or true teachings.
Okay, equal teachings.
But here's the mind-bending historical detail. When the Buddha supposedly spoke those words, the Diamond Sutra itself did not exist yet as a written document.
Wait, so he couldn't have been referring to his own formalized religion?
Exactly. By stating that all teachings of the truth are equal, he was actively validating all prior and parallel teachings that accurately pointed to the Tao.
That's incredible.
That inherent validation covers the teachings of the Tao Te Ching, and it covers the foundational laws of the biblical texts. He wasn't claiming a monopoly on the truth. He was acknowledging that the exact same physics of reality had already been observed and recorded by others, just translated through different cultural lenses.
The curriculum was already out there, just being taught by different professors in different languages. To visualize this, the sources bring up an analogy. I know the story of the blind men and the elephant is a bit of a cliche in comparative religion, but bear with me because the geometry of it works perfectly here.
Go for it.
You have a group of blind men encountering an elephant. One feels the tail and declares an elephant is like a rope. One feels the leg and insists an elephant is like a pillar. Another feels the ear and argues an elephant is like a giant fan. They argue endlessly because their local data contradicts the others, yet they are all touching the exact same underlying reality.
They mistake their limited tactile experience for the totality of the subject.
Right, but let's look at it through the lens of geometry instead. Laozi, operating in ancient China, observed the universe and drew a perfect triangle. The Buddha, operating in ancient India, observed the universe and drew a perfect circle. Jesus, operating in the ancient Middle East, drew a perfect square.
Three very different shapes.
Exactly. If you look at a triangle, a circle, and a square side by side, they look structurally incompatible. They have different rules, different angles, different properties. But if you take those three shapes and lay them precisely over each other, you suddenly realize they all enclose the exact same five-pointed star.
The Chinese have a specific phrase for this realization, Wan Jiao Gizong. It translates to, all religions return to one origin.
All religions return to one origin. The geometry looks different on the outside, but the internal area they are measuring is identical. So for you listening, the takeaway here isn't that you need to abandon your beliefs or adopt a new one.
Not at all.
You can choose whichever textbook speaks to your specific mind most clearly. You can read the Tao Te Ching, you can study the Bible, you can analyze the Diamond Sutra, because the promise of these sources is that if you approach any of them with genuine humility, if you empty your cup and seek the highest education, they all lead to the exact same compounding wisdom.
They all provide the exact same shared DNA, regardless of the cultural packaging.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over long after this deep dive is finished. We started by exploring how these ancient texts seem to speak different languages but arrive at the exact same conclusions. If it is true that all these foundational texts are essentially just different regional translations of the exact same highest education, if the core spiritual DNA of humanity is fundamentally identical, What does that say about the deep, often violent divisions in our modern world?
It's a heavy question.
If the underlying physics of our morality and our origins are exactly the same, are we spending all of our finite time and energy fighting over nothing more than the packaging?